Hello and welcome, and first of all thank you for choosing to look at this video. My name is Lucy Stokes. I'm a researcher at the National Institute of Economic and Social Research in London, and I'm part of the research team for the Wage and Employment Dynamics project. This presentation on identifying use value, developing a research strategy, forms the final presentation in the session on the co-production of value from data by users and producers, submission number 95. Although it will be me speaking today, this presentation is joint with Alex Bryson of UCL, who's also part of the Wage and Employment Dynamics research team. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about developing a research strategy in collaboration with policy users, based on our experiences of doing this so far as part of the Wage and Employment Dynamics project. If you've watched the videos for the earlier presentations in this session, then by now you will already have heard quite a bit about the project. But some of you might not have done, so I'm just going to start by giving a brief overview to help put the rest of the presentation in context. So the Wage and Employment Dynamics project, or WED as we call it for short, is linking together data from various official surveys and admin datasets with the aim of providing new insights into dynamics of earnings and employment in the UK. So for those of you that might be interested in the actual data sets we're using, and you'll have seen this if you've watched the earlier presentations, this includes the Office for National Statistics Annual Survey of Hours and Earnings, along with the 2011 population census. The key purpose of the WED project is the production of a public good, a data set which we often term a wage and employment spine, along with transparent code and documentation about the data for users. And the idea is that with this data, a lot more research will be able to be done on the dynamics of earnings, in particular in the UK. So alongside creating this actual data infrastructure, a key part of the project is also to generate research findings that are of direct interest to policymakers. So our work is funded by ADR UK, and I'll come on to say more about them in a moment. But a key part of what we're doing is to work closely with government departments throughout to ensure that what we're doing is producing policy relevant findings for them. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about the WED story so far in terms of developing a research strategy. So I'm going to talk about the planning process, the initial stages of the project. I'll talk about our experiences of working with government departments so far, including going through a specific example. I'll work with the Low Pay Commission. And although we're still at relatively early stages as our project runs until March 2022, I'll conclude by discussing some of the lessons that we've learned so far. So to start with some background, we know that administrative data can open up substantial opportunities for research, and therefore also to produce insights to help inform policy. But linking and accessing admin data can be really challenging. Anyone that's worked with these sorts of data will know that. And to do this successfully, it really needs buy-in from government departments. The benefits of accessing using the data in this way need to be clear, otherwise the process can really be seen as bringing costs, but without clear benefits, and this can hinder and indeed stall progress. But there are challenges in bringing together academic research and policy. So for example, in academic work, the focus is often on production of research output, for example, a paper in an academic journal. And there can sometimes, while there's often an interest in making those policy relevant, there can still be a bit of a tension sometimes between the need to publish and actual policy needs. That focus sometimes on producing a research output at the end can mean that other activities that can be valuable, such as data documentation, might get left behind. So when everybody's short on time and resources, and perhaps that's an activity that, while very valuable, sits on the back burner and so doesn't get done, or not to the extent that would be ideally helpful. There can also sometimes be limited incentives for academics to share knowledge among the academic community as well. On the other side, policymakers themselves and analysts may have little incentive to allow academics into the process, for example, of data production and so on, because it may just be seen as another demand on their time rather than providing a helpful contribution to the development process. So I said at the start that our project is funded by ADR UK, who launched in 2018. So ADR UK comprises 3 national partnerships, so that's ADR Scotland, ADR Wales and ADR Northern Ireland, along with the Office for National Statistics, and it's coordinated by a UK-wide strategic hub. As I'll discuss in a moment, planning for the WED project began well in advance of actual funding, but the launch of ADR UK represented really an ideal match, recognising the key importance of high quality evidence to inform good policy, and a key part of what they do is to recognise and promote the potential that administrative data offers for research. And also they acknowledge and recognise the challenges in aligning incentives of policymakers and academics. So the things that I've just discussed on the previous slide. So to talk you through the planning and initial stages of the WED project, well, as I said at the start, the key aims of the project are firstly the production of a public good, our wage and employment spine or data set, with transparent code and documentation for users, but along that to use that to produce policy relevant research findings with input from policy customers. Some key threats to the success of the project include not being able to obtain the necessary data and risk of potential duplication of work, for example, if multiple research teams were trying to do similar things at the same time, and ensuring that our spine would achieve what was actually wanted, that it would actually do the job that it was intended to do. So the planning for the project really started very early, and this stage is really crucial. So the planning process started around 18 months prior to the start of funding, though I think even some ideas and thoughts were being generated before that. And this process of planning involved considerable engagement with government departments. So this included things like reviewing individual departments' areas of research interest to see where, if these data existed, by matching the data together in a particular and new way, how would that be able to be used? What sorts of questions might this new data be able to answer? So that included reviewing these areas of research interest, having individual meetings to discuss the possibilities, as well as reviewing information from data providers about express data needs. So this process over time generated considerable interest, which meant that at the point of that funding was actually achieved, there was a portfolio of potential research projects across various areas of government. But then this left really another question for the team. So faced with this wide set potentially of options, really, how should those be prioritised? And indeed, where should we start? So in the short term, it was clear that there was going to be a lot of substantial data development work, and this meant and still means that there'll be a long period of data cleaning and linking and refining. So as a team, we identified 2 initial sponsors, the Low Pay Commission LPC and the Government Equality Office GEO, whose research priorities coincided most clearly with the data development plan, alongside also the research interests of the WED team itself. In the longer term, the direction of the project can also be steered through our government stakeholder group. So this has been established to develop and steer the longer term research strategy, to provide feedback on what we're doing. Obviously we have a set of initial plans, but how might that evolve as things go along, and to advise us on that. Also potential to advise us on new opportunities for linking that could help explore new opportunities that may not have been thought about initially. So that group includes representatives from the various different departments with whom those initial discussions took place in the planning process. So really building on those relationships that were formed then and hopefully continuing to do so. Alongside that, an academic stakeholder group has also been established to help bring some academic insights and review onto what we're doing. And so there will also be some joint meetings of the government stakeholder group and the academic stakeholder group, so that we can all benefit from sharing perspectives and also hopefully help to facilitate further links between academic and policy communities as we go on. So some of this, I think it perhaps helps to talk through an actual example. So I'm going to talk here about the work we've been doing alongside the Low Pay Commission, or LPC. So there were a lot of early discussions with LPC in the planning stages. We've worked with them closely throughout the project so far, indeed from before it began. So these early discussions were really vital to discuss the potential for what the data might be able to do if it existed, the needs of LPC, how any new data might be able to address these. So, and in particular, we're trying to look a lot with these data because they will allow us to better follow individuals over time, presents a new opportunity to really look in more detail at some issues around low pay progression, which is something of real interest and value, particularly to the LPC, but also more broadly, of course. So part of the early process was for LPC to identify some strategic needs and some gaps where they felt these data, this research might really be able to help. In practical terms, for example, the LPC provided us with a letter of support for our funding application, have also helped to support our data applications, both of which have been really vital in helping the project to move forward. Then within the early stages of the project, the research team identified some potential research topics, so drawing on those early discussions with the LPC, but also from reviewing the academic literature and seeing from that perspective also where the gaps seem to exist. And on the basis of that, the research team drew up a proposed research agenda with some thoughts and ideas of where we felt we could contribute. And then we met with the LPC, we shared this possible agenda, discussed, they gave us feedback. As part of that process, we also brought in input from some key academic experts as well to obtain their view. And as a result of that, we came up with an initial plan for a joint research strategy agreed between us. But that's not the end of the story. There's a plan, but that can evolve. So as we're going along, we're sharing early findings so that those can be reviewed as a group, allowing for further tweaking and development of the research plan in a iterative process, really. What a key part of what we're doing is not really just about producing an end goal, the output at the end, or a report or publication at the end, but also here recognizing the key value of the data infrastructure for potential further research that LPC may wish to do or commission. So that's a key part of ensuring why we're not just producing an output, but we're being very careful in documenting the data, our approach, so that others will then be able to revisit that, build on it if they wish to do so, or take different assumptions, for example, so that all of that will be very clear and documented and that others can also build on it as well. I think a couple of caveats just to note at this point. Obviously, we're still very much in the process of doing this work, so we're still at the relatively early stages of the project. No doubt things will evolve a lot as we go on. I think it's also worth saying that LPC have had a very long established track record of focus on evidence-based policy, and so we're conscious that they may well represent the frontier in some senses, if you like. So there could well be different experiences, but nevertheless, I feel it's hopefully a helpful example to explain how we've been going about developing this joint research strategy. We're still in the relatively early stages of the project, as I've said already, but even so, there are a number of lessons that we've learned so far. No doubt by the end of our project, there will be many more. So firstly, we'd say that co-producing a research strategy in this way can be a slow and iterative process, but it's worthwhile to build substantive long-term links with policy users of research. I think it's worth noting that this also raises some funding challenges on the research side. So given the importance of the planning process and the engagement in the early stages, even prior to securing funding, it raises a challenge around how that time can be resourced. So I think that's something that's worth bearing in mind, and perhaps even this needs some thought into how funding initiatives might be able to increase funding for exploratory stages and development work in order to help give time for that process that can really be fundamental in helping to build a stronger research project going forward. Secondly, there's certainly a need on all sides to manage expectations. So anyone who's worked with admin data will tell you that this always brings complexities, and certainly been the case for us, even with many of the team having significant experience in working with admin data. And of course, this time there have been even more issues in the light of the COVID-19 crisis. How can we help address these? Well, these issues need continual review, they need good planning, and they need good communication between all partners, and an ongoing need to manage expectations and to keep everyone in the loop, communicate well. And finally, our third lesson for now, I think, would really be that we'd say that we think about research can be important in informing policy, but also we would say that the input from policymakers can be just as important for research. So jointly developing a research strategy is really invaluable in helping to ensure that research genuinely addresses policy needs and enables the identification of gaps that may sometimes be less immediately apparent to academic researchers. For example, we've certainly come across in our work so far, one point raised is that sometimes there's just a lack of even good basic descriptive evidence on some key elements. So I think those discussions can really help shine light on some areas that policymakers would really value input from academic researchers on. So as I've said already, no doubt there'll be many more lessons for us to learn as the project progresses. And so watch this space. So finally, thank you very much for watching. If you're interested in finding out more about the WED project, please take a look at our website as shown on the link on the slide. You can sign up for updates on the project there, and also please do feel free to get in touch with us for any queries. So thanks again for watching.